When I remember my state of mind when I was in the real pits of addiction, I remember just feeling deeply and profoundly isolated. I didn't really have a deep sense of meaning, a deep sense of connection to the world. I felt like I was well and truly on my own. And I think many of the people who view my channel and listen to what I have to say will perhaps relate to this feeling of profound isolation with the world. And ever since I was a young child, I've always been a deep thinker. I've always asked questions that many people overlook, and I've always thought about things that were very different to what most of my peers were interested in. And I think I remember, especially when I got to university, which is where the period of my life where my addictions took a real deep turn, I remember just feeling very alone with my thoughts and very misunderstood by all the people around me. And consequently, whenever I would meet people or speak to people, there was this very large part of myself that I had to conceal, that I couldn't express. I was in denial of this authentic part of myself, because every time I would allow that part of myself, that deeper part of myself, to open up in conversation, it would be rejected. People would not be able to resonate on that frequency. They would not be able to understand the things that I spoke about. And that deeply frustrated me at a existential level. So I didn't have really many people who could meet me at my depths. And then that perhaps led to me to believe that perhaps it's just the way things are. Perhaps I would never be able to meet someone who can meet me at those depths. And so I used to spend my time just on long walks, with listening to books or just my thoughts. I'll go to the woods and I'd write, and journal and meditate. And that was what I would do. In between, of course, sort of barely keeping up with my uni work and stuff. But I didn't really spend much time with other people, truly with other people. Most of my time was alone, and I chose that because the alternative to that was spending time with people who are not truly aligned to myself. And now, I bared with this isolation for a while. In my first and second years, the only real drugs I used to do was just, weed pretty much every day. And that was, weed every day is not ideal, but it was a way of me coping with my deep isolation. When I'll get high, I would be able to lose myself in the moment and not think about all of this gnawing isolation. The lack of any real romantic relationships in my life, lack of any deeply close relationships in my life. I could be content with just being myself, or partially content. And I would distract myself and try and nurture myself with exercise and meditation and all these sort of different ways of, reading loads of books, all these sort of things to try and give myself something to do with my solitude. And the only time I would sort of socialize, there would always be, alcohol or some kind of drugs involved. And that would be the only way I would be able to really, cope with social situations, And that's people who are, neurodivergent or on the autism spectrum can understand that feeling of masking oneself with substances, taking their consciousness in this place where they're not as inhibited or fearful in social situations. So yeah, I look at my entire uni experience as like solitude and then intoxication with regards to socializing. And this sort of cycle, it really amplified in my, second and last year, really, and especially in my last year, where I got into much harder drugs, and I was doing them much more obsessively and compulsively, and much more recklessly. And I've spoken about all the various substances that I was addicted to in my sort of past videos. Various stimulants like Mephedrone and cocaine and dissociatives like Ketamine. I also flirted around with benzos like Xanax and stuff like that, and stronger ones, I can't remember their names. I think diazepam or something. Certain opioids I flirted around with. Lots of different things. I would use them either in sort of on my own or in social situations. Initially, it always began mostly in social situations. Then even in my alone time, I would just be high all the time, trying to avoid sobriety, which is my baseline, because of all the drugs, my baseline became even more unbearable, Then eventually I couldn't even use cannabis because cannabis was giving me panic attacks and stuff. But yeah, I look at that episode of my life and I'm astonished that I lived it. And because this part of my life is about nearly a year and a half, 2 years ago. And in that very short period of time, my life has almost completely transformed. I'm now married to the most amazing person I've ever met. I'm in a completely different country. My consciousness is in a completely different space. And all of this is a testament to how, no matter how shit it can get, you always have the ability to transform, And I reached a real deep rock bottom, many rock bottoms. I saw quite clearly why many people choose to, well, I won't say because YouTube may cancel this sort of video, but most people make certain significant decisions with their life. I understand why people do that. Because I was very much in a state of consciousness where I'd wake up every morning after just a night of binging drugs by myself in my room, my dark room. I'd wake up, my joints were all aching. My body felt like shit. My lungs were fucked because I would often, compulsively vape whilst binging, Mephedrone, snorting it line after line after line until I ran out. And snorting ketamine as well. I used to mix them both at the same time. And I'd be compulsively vaping, so my lungs were a bit messed up. And I'd wake up in the morning sort of aching with all that sort of feeling. And I don't know, the first thing I would do would just be, I'd make a cup of coffee in the morning. I don't drink coffee anymore. In fact, I had to stop. I remember when I was first healing, after I'd have like really bad heart symptoms and panic attacks, I couldn't even drink coffee. I had to let go of that pattern, which, I used to drink coffee for the longest period of time, ever since I was a young teenager. But even that was a sort of an addiction, really. Stimulants, caffeine. And then eventually I sort of transitioned to tea, and now I just drink green tea by itself, which is a much more healthier way to live, I find. It's much more aligned to my sort of more yogic principles that I try to live by. But yeah, to come back, every morning I recall was just sort of waking up, my head was just be pounding, or there would just be this dull ache. My entire body was just aching. And I would have zero motivation to do anything. I would still do stuff because there were still these deep habitual action patterns in my body. I'd wake up, make myself some coffee, perhaps, listen to a podcast or something like that, something to distract myself, but there would be no real enjoyment in any of it. I would do it because I felt like that's what I needed to do that particular time of the day, but I wouldn't enjoy it. I wouldn't feel any passion about it. The only things I was passionate about was just getting high. And, if I was lucky, I would still have some drugs, or perhaps I used to always have sort of substances in my possession. So I would just, start doing ketamine at like 10 in the morning or something. Ketamine was the one thing, I used to do that in binges, quite significantly. And just to dissociate from my reality. And it would give me this sort of feeling of like, okay, things aren't too bad. The pains in my body and my head aren't too bad. And I would almost be a functional ketamine user, or a barely functional ketamine user. And it was fun whilst I was high. I think that's what we all have to acknowledge, when we're addicted to something, like we're addicted to things because they're fun. And the fun feeling of being out of your mind and experiencing all different sort of things, it allows you to distract yourself, and it avoids the confrontation with all of that repressed bodily trauma and all the destruction that you're doing to your body. Ketamine was quite destructive for me, but the most destructive thing for me was Mephedrone, which is kind of like this research chemical that is a mix of cocaine and MDMA. It's very bingy, very compulsive. It's like cocaine with this sort of more of a social, empathogenic component, where you feel very, very talkative and very interested in people sometimes, and very lovey-dovey. Not quite the lovey-dovey of MDMA. But Mephedrone was perhaps the most central drug in my self-destruction, particularly in terms of how compulsive it became when you're in the binge of it, and how each line that you do just leads to another line 5, 10, 15 minutes later. It's like this sort of cycle and this trance, and you're really powerless to say no. That powerlessness and that sort of blind obedience to my pleasures, just trying to cluster and build up the dopamine and stuff. It was quite shocking and astonishing to see, because the bliss that you attain on a Mephedrone high, if you read about it, it is just insane. It's almost too much bliss for a human body, let alone a 22-year-old, to really handle. So obviously when you experience that level of bliss from just taking way too much of a drug, it makes everything else in life just feel just pale in comparison. And obviously that leads to what's known as anhedonia, this inability to experience pleasure from conventional everyday life. And so that experience of total utter bliss, it gave me the most radical escape from the weight of my suffering. And obviously, when you experience something as good as that, apologies for this loud noise in the background, hopefully it will go in a moment. When you experience a bliss, an illusory bliss, as powerful as that, it overshadows everything of meaning in your life, and your entire sense of meaning just channels into pursuing more of that thing, chasing more of that feeling. We become addicted to that feeling because the feeling is obviously very, 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 very good, very, very insane. Now, of course, I can look at that now and see the inauthenticity of that feeling, the inauthenticity of that bliss, how it was not true bliss. It was an artificial, a synthetic bliss. Because it made you trapped. It made you want more of it. It led you into the feeling of more craving. You know, when you do that first line, you crave that next line. And when you do that next line, you crave the next line even more. And the craving that it builds up is insatiable. And that's why many times I would not be able to stop using the drug until I had none of it in my possession. And when it all ran out, I would be desperately trying to find scraps and remnants or whatever in my room to create another little line because I'd often spill a lot of it because I'd just be doing it so much. And yeah, it's astonishing to see how fiendish I've become. And seeing how fiendish you can become when your lust for pleasure just overrides everything. It instills in you the most deep humility. And it shows me really how much of a prisoner I became to my sensory pleasures. And I think, as a sort of a concluding remark I want to sort of leave to you guys listening is that to think about the things that you love in life. Are you trapped by the things that you love? As in the case of addiction, where your love of a drug makes you more and more enslaved to it? Or other things that you love, let's say your love of walks in nature, or your love of your wife or your loved one. Is your love for that liberating you? Does it make you feel more free to be? Do you feel empty when you sort of have that thing that you love? Or do you feel full? Do you feel like you're truly satiated? Because the thing with addiction is that addiction is a form of love. It's a form of false love. But the love does not make us feel whole or complete or satiated. It's a love, an indulgence that makes us feel more and more empty. And when we feel more and more empty, makes us crave more. We go desperately to search for more of that thing. But when we love something that is true and noble and truly nourishing, when we have that thing that we love, we feel nourished. We feel whole. We feel content with existence itself. So ask yourself that question. Am I content with existence as it is right now? Is there anything else I need? Do I need this thing? Do I want this thing? Because addictions, when you're in the pits of addiction, you always have at the back of your mind the addiction object and that craving for it. And that craving disturbs your peace in this very sticky way. It like sticks to your mind like glue. And you can't be content with anything else because you're always wanting that thing. You're always wanting to amplify the sensory pleasure of this experience. So the real full and complete culmination of your healing from addiction is dissolving the cravings that you have, dissolving the cravings that disturb your peace, and understanding that your addictive patterns will never get you the thing that it promises you. It promises you peace and happiness, but it delivers only deeper emptiness. When you fully understand that, that will be the first essential step in transcending it. And the other step is being able to relish and appreciate the simple pleasures of life, the simple act of existence itself. Being able to be grateful for the sky, for the trees, for nature, to see the divine in everything, both good and the bad. And when you're there, you feel whole, you feel complete, you feel like you don't need anything else to add to your bliss because you feel content already. That's the state that we all should be yearning for, and we should be striving towards. So yeah, well, that's been useful and insightful for all of you guys. I'll see you next time, and adios.